Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 12th of December 2023. I have so much content to get through and I want to do it in one video because I do too much content for you guys, too many videos. So this is going to be quick. Okay, first of all, I'm going to add to what I talked about earlier with regard to Kyivstar. So that's the telecoms, the mobile phone company that was down in Ukraine, and I said that was possibly as a result of being struck in missile or drone attacks last night, but actually it looks like it was hackers, Russian hackers bring that down, but it is due to be up within 4 or 5 hours. However, it just goes to show that the Russians are still very active in the cyber world. Okay, we're going to go on to Zelensky's trip to the US, and there will be video forthcoming on that with regard to his speeches, Lloyd Austin speeches, etc., etc. But the kind of preamble to that is Reuters reports that over 100 EU lawmakers call for Congress to approve Ukrainian aid. Officials represent at least 17 countries, including France, Germany, Italy, and Poland, and will send a letter to their US counterparts on the 12th, so that's today. Now, I don't know how well that would go down with Americans being told or being advised by Europeans what to do. And there will be a lot of pushback, I imagine, from Republicans saying, well, this is your war. You need to pick up the bill. You need to pick up what you're doing. But indeed, that has actually happened. If you look at as a percentage of GDP, as a per capita ratio, the US is something like what was last time I looked about 12th on the list. And so actually there's like 11 European countries who are above the US in terms of some of those metrics, and indeed Germany's overtaken US in military aid just recently. So actually that has been done. The Europeans are picking up, and you know, the US has been right to call them out, Europeans out, for not doing enough, but I think that is now happening, and it should be everyone in this together. So it'd be interesting to see how that is received. Anyway, we had Zelenskyy during his visit to the US addressing senators and meeting House of Representatives. The Speaker, Mike Johnson, also expected to meet with the manager of the IMF, and the IMF has announced another tranche of actually loans, $900 million of loans, dollars, sorry. Anyway, Tim White says it was a productive trip for America, or was at the time of writing so far for Zelenskyy. He's met with the US Defense Minister or Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, who promised to build a future force that can ward off Russian aggression for years. And Bloomberg reports Argentina will host a Latin American summit on Ukraine. So that is an interesting outcome that Zelenskyy has achieved. So he's met with the heads of US defense companies, and there's a very strategic element to his move. You've got to think, right, if you were Zelenskyy and his team, okay, messaging is going to be super important and delicate, because the more we pressure Republicans to do something, the more those lawmakers will push back. So we need to treat this with quite a lot of nuance and delicacy. So I think the idea that this needs to be a case of selling Ukraine aid as a economic benefit to the US is going to play center stage. And indeed, that's exactly what seems to have happened. So it's not only about the speeches he made to the senators and to the lawmakers, but also meeting with those defense corporations to try and, you know, get this idea up and running that this is of mutual economic benefit for both countries. Quote, Ukraine is ready to produce more ammunition and military equipment, ready to reduce bureaucracy and place orders. So we're going to reduce bureaucracy. Come and set up. Come and do business here, and we'll help you do business. Kyiv also wants to invite American partners to enter the share of Ukrainian defense companies. Okay, so now he's talking in economic terms, and hopefully that will also find purchase with American lawmakers, particularly reticent American lawmakers, say, look, you've got this corporation set up in your state, in your district. How about we do a deal that's going to benefit you and your taxpayers? As Zelenskyy himself said, I met with leaders of US defense companies and expressed my gratitude to every American worker. Again, this is the rhetoric. I totally predicted this, and it is definitely what seems to be happening. I express my gratitude to every American worker who manufactures weapons that helps us safeguard our people and defend our land. I appreciated all American companies that attended last week's US-Ukraine Defense Industry Conference. This is all about economics. I also proposed establishing a European defence hub in Ukraine, which is still about economics. We are prepared to make all essential decisions, cut red tape, and allocate orders. Money, money, money. We are ready, but for him, this is like defence, defence, defence. Existential, this is the continued existence of Ukraine. How do we get that? By appealing to American economic intuitions. We are ready to produce more ammunition and military vehicles, but we require support. It is important to develop joint production of artillery ammo, air defense systems, and artillery and missile systems. Together, we can create more jobs. That's the first thing, more jobs. Generate more strength and provide more opportunities for both of our nations. He's not talking about help us. It's the moral obligation for you to help us against these horrible Russians. Has already been done and said. There's nothing more we can say about that hasn't already been said. And therefore, that isn't going to convince Americans and American lawmakers. And we'll come to this in a second. Max 23 reports from the White House that USA will announce a package of military aid to Ukraine by the end of the year. One would assume that's going to be part of the remaining presidential drawdown authority. And hopefully, as Ukraine Battle Map says, hopefully it's not less than $400 million. This guy's an American, by the way, I think, because all the previous packages were extremely small, like 100 million to 175 million. US military aid to Ukraine has decreased by over 90%. Usually $3 billion was sent every month, and now it's a lot less. And US still has $4.7 billion left to send, but that needs to be sent before it runs out. Okay, now how is this all being seen in Russia? It's worth looking at this a little bit. So this is the typical Solovyov show here. So let's not have the sound. Let's have them play. I'm going to read out the subtitles for those listening. And actually, I'm going to skip through it. What's happening in the US is beneficial to us, they say. I will repeat it once again. The US is undoubtedly a mighty nation. It possesses a very serious potential. How patronizing. Hey, US, you've got potential, mate. You've got potential. Keep going. So these are the Russian propagandists. It possesses very serious potential militarily, economically, and financially. But the hegemon is sinking. So this supreme power that the US has at the head of the global economic world order is sinking, he claims. If it isn't immediately losing in a war, a big war, but the hegemon is sinking. If it isn't immediately losing in a war, then it's slowly sinking. What is happening in the United States, he says, leaves an impression on the whole world. On the 14th, the Congress goes on a vacation. They won't be back until January the 9th. That's right. They're leaving on the 14th so they can watch the direct line with the president of the Russian Federation without any distractions. That's why they're leaving. This means that the whole aid package to Ukraine is up in the air. Americans are retaining their power. So he's selling this as Americans exercising their power to stop Ukraine getting stuff. They are retaining their power and their prior mechanisms. And he goes on to say, it's Trump's enormous achievement. He did all that he could to undermine the trust of all their allies. This is how the Russian propagandists, and this is why they favour Trump being re-elected, and they favoured Trump being elected previously. They see him as undermining the trust of all the US allies towards the United States. Yes, there's a great dependence of allies and US satellites. It remains, which is precisely what allows them to persevere. But it is sinking, he continues. So this idea that the whole US, that partnership of its allies is sinking, and we're moving towards this new era of Russian and Chinese and BRICS dominance. Because who will be the next president? Why is it sinking? Who will be the next president? Trump? He says Trump is a very good president. He did it all. So, of course, they see Trump as a good president in relation to what he achieved for Russia. If Trump comes back, the withdrawal from NATO is currently a topic of serious discussion. If Trump returns to power for a second time, he will most likely take the US out of NATO. Trump is a very particular person. Do the Japanese and Koreans pay for the presence of US troops on their territory? You've got to understand, again, I keep saying this, go and look at Perun's video on the export of security that US has and why NATO is so important. And it's not just about spending the money on military presence around the world and the idea that it's costing the US. Actually, they're getting trade deals back. They're getting a return on investment. They're selling military equipment, etc., etc. This is not to be seen in a way is just being proposed by this propagandist. But it is really fascinating that Trump's success is seen in terms of his willingness to dismantle NATO or take the US out of NATO. And NATO is a US thing, right? It's part of the Cold War legacy. But yeah, anyway, I suppose if you're a Trump fan, you've got to question why Putin, an authoritarian dictator, really wants Trump. Why the Russians really want Trump in charge. And he continues, why aren't the Europeans? He won't take them out. The Europeans will pay. I can't quite agree with you on this. So there's them talking across each other here. But anyway, they go on to talk about how the Indo-Pacific is another area that's going to take the attention of the Americans. And then it goes on to this. If you're American, right, you might not like this because they are dissing the American military here. What war have Americans ever won? And then he answers, the Cold War. Well, the Cold War wasn't won with their army. He goes, Americans won the Cold War, he says. Yes, but their army, not their army. When and where has their army ever defeated anyone? Well, what can I say, he replies. We imagine the greatness of the American army. And of course, this is in light of the fact that their own army has been really underperforming. But they say we can imagine the greatness thanks to the American cinema. So it's all just PR. There's no real American military quality, and what war can you remember them winning? Well, there's the Gulf War. They haven't fought on land for a very long time. That's right. This is their level, and so on and so forth. So that's just a little insight into how this is all playing out in Russian propaganda. Now, what's really important to me is this. This is exactly why I've been shouting about the need for the US administration, Biden's administration, to start selling the idea of supporting Ukraine in a different way to the American public. Tell them why it's important, not just the moral calculus, but the economic, the geopolitical calculus as well. And lo and behold, support grows after contextualizing aid. So initially 50% said the aid was worth the cost, but the percent jumps to 64% after being given context. The US has spent roughly $24 billion on military aid to Ukraine, which is roughly 3% of the US military's own budget. Ukraine remains in control of roughly 83% of its territory, and US intelligence believes the war has severely degraded Russia's military power and its ability to threaten NATO allies. Knowing this, do you think US aid to Ukraine has been worth the cost or not? I think if you throw in the whole economic context as well, then that percentage grows, and that's exactly what needs to happen. And it's about time the US concentrate on messaging. Right, and with regard to what Zelenskyy was saying in terms of ramping up indigenous production and getting the US involved in that whole scheme, there's a good PBS interview with Kamishin, the guy with the top knot I keep mentioning that used to be in charge of the railways. Well, anyway, I'm going to just read you the transcript of his replies. You're going to have to work out what the questions were, but it's pretty obvious. Here we have a strong political signal, says Commission, coming from the leadership of the US government that says the defense industry should look at the opportunity to start collaborating in Ukraine. For me, it's important because I'm here to promote business opportunities for US defense industry. Again, this is the messaging that the US are going to want to hear. We urgently need all the arms, but for US companies, it's a great opportunity. Ukraine gives an opportunity to shorten the innovation cycle. We have proved that we can be good in defense tech, and that's something that lessons learned from our defense tech would be important for US. And the second point, we have got great engineers. That's something you're going to find if you start your local production in Ukraine. And the third point, it's a great opportunity to test your weapon and ammunition in the greatest war of generations and to make it better. Not great as in good, as in great as in big. So it's selling the idea of setting up shop in Ukraine. You can test out your weapons, you're going to have good innovation, and it's going to be useful for your own national defenses as well. So building defense industry takes years. Everyone knows that. We've got some quick wins with the Franken-SAM. So this idea of like combining elements of surface-to-air missile systems into one system. So the Franken-SAM portfolio projects, how we call it. Franken-SAM, yes. And that's something we already have on the ground on the battlefield in Ukraine. That's something where the US defense industries, Ukrainian defense industry work together with the US and the Ukrainian armed forces. And finally, we get a fast solution, as we call it, do-it-yourself defense that already works. We already have success. We've had success with long-range missiles in Ukraine, but I would not speak more about that. But we've also got great success with defense tech, with drones that fly as far as reaching Russia already. And you have probably seen that Moscow never sleeps, Sochi never sleeps, and many other Russian cities would not sleep quite soon. There's a bit of a hint at what may come. So the question is, those with all due respect have been individual attacks. We're talking about the scale at which Ukraine builds drones or long-range fires that can affect Russian calculus. That can actually affect how Putin thinks about the threat from Ukraine. Is that the goal? Definitely, Commission says. And for Ukraine defense tech, there's something where you will see how we produce drones. So it's built up in the last half year, definitely. And there's something that's something that scales up fast enough. And that's something that is already delivering. And scale will be quite soon. So there's this idea that they will have huge drone scale coming online. We are a democratic country, and meanwhile we will find a way how we can live during the war, and our economy is fully switching to the wartime economy. Interesting. And we spend every single hryvnia of that's local currency in Ukraine, we collect in the country, we spend it for the war. So it goes to the salaries of servicemen and to the acquisition. Major factories in defense already running 24/7, and again, it's never enough. We understand it, but already now defense industry starts running. In my previous life on the railways, I've been repeating we keep running. So now we say that we start running. So what he's saying here is we used to say with the railways, we keep them running. We keep the railways running. And that was his mantra in keeping the railways up and running when they were getting bombed at the beginning of the war. Well, he says, instead of keeping running, we're starting running. We're starting the defense industry, and we have got this strong legacy. But to be frank, it had been abandoned for decades, and now we're starting almost from scratch. That's interesting insight there into the indigenous military industrial complex in Ukraine. So now going on to actual aid. So about 30 so this is exactly what he's just been talking about. About 30 self-propelled Bogdana have already been assembled by the armed forces. So remember, there were only 2 recently. Just 2, and then they were producing how many a month? Well, now they're up to 30 have been produced. 25 enterprises and 400 people are involved in serial production. The cost of the Bogdana is twice as cheap as a French Caesar. Now, it's probably not as technologically advanced as a Caesar. Caesar is a really decent bit of kit, but if it's twice as cheap, then I don't know, you get 2 for the price of 1. I'm sure you can eke out an advantage there. The issue is just ammunition, right? So the IMF is to provide Ukraine with another tranche of $900 million. This isn't just giving them money. These will be loans with strings attached. The IMF's board of executive directors today completed the second review of the extended credit facility for Ukraine, which will allow the allocation, the amount equivalent to $900 million, to be used for budget support, so to keep the country running. The EU is to propose a plan to redirect 15 billion euros in projected profits from frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. So this was talked about previously, and now it looks like they're putting that in place, which is these frozen Russian assets are producing profits still. They're whatever it is, some kind of economic, financial entities that the EU is frozen. Well, they are still making money even though they're frozen, so we can just skim that profit off and send it to Ukraine. And that's worth 15 billion euros in projected profits. So the EU will suggest a proposal to seize them and transfer them to Ukraine. Good news. Let's get that happening. European Commission intends to raise the 15 billions, but here's the issue, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these kind of issues a bit later. The developed plan must be supported by all EU member states. So if you've got Slovakia and Hungary being problematic, then that may not happen. Germany has confirmed that it will increase aid to Ukraine to the tune of 8 billion euros next year, according to the German Minister for European Affairs, Anna Luhrmann, before the meeting of the EU Council on Foreign Affairs. The UK and Norway will provide Ukraine's military with ships and vehicles for the Navy. So it talks about 2 Sandown-class mine hunters yesterday. This was reported by the MOD of Ukraine. So they've got the 2 mine hunters, but also 20 Viking amphibious vehicles and 23 raiding vessels. So what? Apparently they're getting 23 Viking longboats that are in the Jorvik Museum in York, celebrating the connection of the Viking raids to UK culture. They're going to take 23 longboats and then they're going to send them out. They're going to be really useful. Of course they're not. I'm joking. I don't know what 23 raiding vessels are. They're not longboats, but 20 Viking amphibious vehicles look like this. Are very similar to the Bandsvang that have been provided by Nordic states. So 20 of these vehicles are going to be sent from Great Britain to Ukraine. And that maritime coalition between UK and Norway I've neglected to furnish you with my favourite joke of the last year, which is this. And I'm sorry, it's a right dad joke. But why does the Norwegian Navy have barcodes on the side of their ships? So when they come back to port, they can scan the Navy in. They can Scandinavian barcodes. Moving on, as the first Polish-made rack mortar carries, so this is a self-propelled mortar, arrived in Ukraine. Here's a thread about how the mortar carriers how they are operated. So I'm not going to read you this Thomas Tyner thread, but this is the M120 rack, which is a Polish-built self-propelled mortar. He talks about, how these are developed, how this came to be developed. But he said that these can fire mortars while the crew and ammo sit inside them. They remain protected rather than being outside, as some self-propelled mortars have them. First vehicle ready for production. Anyway, you get the idea. So the rack self-propelled mortar is in Ukraine now. I don't know how many they're going to get and when they'll get them all, but that's good news. There's some amazing German ones. I think I might have even read you this thread when it came out. I'm pretty sure I did, actually. So anyway, that's good. Sweden has announced a winter aid package for Ukraine worth 120 million euros, according to their prime minister. The money will go to the World Bank's Fund for Ukraine's Reconstruction. It will also buy equipment for heating and transferring capacity in the Ukrainian energy grid. Excellent, Sweden. And Denmark is spearheading the reconstruction of war-torn Mykolaiv Oblast, investing in local businesses and aiming to rebuild the commercial landscape to benefit both the nations economically. I might dip into this Kyiv Independent to get some more details about. We talked about this previously, but I didn't know the details of how they were going to do that. But Denmark has chosen one kind of area, and that might be the best kind of model where different countries choose particular areas to support in their reconstruction. 4 more armoured ambulances from United 24 are transferred to the front line. In total, 13 cars were purchased from Canadian partners. 11 of them are already in Ukraine. Medics will be able to safely evacuate the wounded from the front line. Thanks to everyone who supports United 24. I'm a big fan of United 24. I think it's a phenomenal fundraising machine that has given an awful lot of equipment to Ukraine. Right. Police and military officers carried out a raid in Russia on migrants in Yekaterinburg. Several dozen masked law enforcers, employees of the investigative committee, military and police officers, as well as activists of the Russian community, organized a raid on migrants in the Greenwich shopping centre, local media reported. About 16 people were detained during the raid. Allegedly, they were forced to take DNA tests and were served summonses to the military enlistment office. So this idea that migrants are being targeted, and we heard that at the Finnish border they'd been taking people from there to sign them up, or in that context, Finland has reopened one of its largest borders on the border checkpoints on the border with Russia. According to the source, the decision will be made to monitor the work of the checkpoint during the holidays. However, it is possible the checkpoints will not be closed after them. I'm not sure what that means. In other words, it might open the others, but I don't know. Russian armed forces, again in this same kind of topic, are showcasing more and more foreigners in their ranks. So this is Rebar, but Rebar's selling this, and there may be elements here that are correct. There are definitely volunteers coming from abroad to help the Russians, but how much of this is about all of the foreigners being ideologically aligned to Russia? I don't know. For some reason, they say the Russian Defense Ministry had a certain block on accepting foreign units until this autumn. There were isolated cases, but the formation of foreign units was not allowed. Thousands of people would jump at the chance to fight the collective West if the opportunity presented itself. So the idea that there are an awful lot of people around the world that hate the West and want to go and fight, would like to go and fight against the West for Russia in this ideological war. And that may well be true. So now, not only have they removed the block, but they're actively showcasing foreigners recruited into the Russian armed forces. More and more videos are surfacing, triggering a chain reaction, and the West is trying to counter this by creating stories about the forced recruitment of migrants at the Finnish border. So this is a kind of an attempt at a corrective for the idea that migrants are being signed up for the war effort by saying, no, it's not. These are volunteers. And they are ideologically aligned to the Russian war project. So the truth is going to be somewhere in the middle, no doubt that there are those, but there are also undoubtedly migrants being signed up as well. Okay, moving on to political stuff. I know it's been long already, so congratulations on Donald Tusk, says Volodymyr Zelenskyy, on his election as Prime Minister of Poland by the same. Ukraine and Poland's future lies in unity, mutual assistance and strategic partnership in order to defeat our common enemy. When we stand together, both our nations' freedom is unbeatable. We appreciate Poland's support. Together we enhance each other and the entire Europe. I am certain that Ukraine and Poland will remain committed to the cause of defending global freedom. Well, Tusk has got on with the work pretty quickly. Tusk finally saying what needs to be said. Let's hope they do what's said. Okay, I said that it's likely Donald Tusk will be a net benefit as a ruler in Poland for Ukraine. So the previous prime minister was pro-Ukrainian but anti-EU. And I think the wedge between Poland and the EU was counterproductive in the long run in assisting Ukraine. And Donald Tusk being so pro-EU will mean that Poland will be in a much stronger position to support Ukraine by working with the EU and wanting to sort out issues that are EU issues within Poland. And indeed, he's come out and said, we will demand the full mobilization of the West to help Ukraine. So with his European connections, that is definitely going to be something that he's going to concentrate on. I can't listen anymore to politicians who talk about being tired of the situation in Ukraine. An attack on Ukraine is an attack on us all. So I think this is going to be good for Ukraine. At the same time, Hungarians in Ukraine have asked Orban, and same with Slovakians in Ukraine have asked Fico as well. They've sent letters to support the launch of Ukraine's EU accession talks. So that's good news. There's some pressure from Hungarians and Slovakians on their leaders. But there's an awful lot of bad news coming out of this. So, right. Go to yourself. So, okay. Kuleba is to meet the Hungarian foreign minister. So he's the Ukrainian foreign minister. They met for the first time since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion to discuss updates to Ukrainian legislation on national minorities, so the Hungarians within Ukraine, and also address the initiation of EU accession talks for Ukraine. The Minister of Defense as well held a telephone conversation with the Minister of Defense of Hungary. So the Ukrainians, Umerov, spoke to the Hungarian counterparts, hoping for further cooperation. Unfortunately, it appears that, nothing really worked. So Slovakia is the second EU country to oppose the start of accession negotiations for Ukraine. That is reported by various media outlets, citing a statement by the chairman of the Commission of Foreign Relations of the Slovak Parliament. And also the Hungarian Foreign Minister, Hungary's position on Ukraine EU accession is unchanged. So now we have Slovakia and Hungary being against Ukraine's EU succession in the talks starting on the 14th, so in 2 days' time. Now, even worse news. Austria follows Hungary and Slovakia in opposing Ukraine's EU accession talks. The Austrian government will not agree to negotiations on Ukraine's accession to the EU under the current conditions. This was stated by Austrian Chancellor Karl Nehammer, speaking to members of the European Parliament. In Nehammer's opinion, quote, there should be no favouritism. And there is an element of truth to this, but I think Ukraine weren't hoping for favouritism. They've jumped through the hoops quicker than others have towards Ukraine, especially against the background of the ongoing succession and accession negotiations with Bosnia-Herzegovina, which have long been asking to join the EU. Nehammer said that as a sign of solidarity, Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova should also be offered the prospect of accession, but the Austrian government is against a fast-track procedure for these two states. Earlier, Hungary and Slovakia opposed Ukraine's accession to the EU. So this is bad news. Viktor Orban, at the same time, is in Washington to push for an end to the US military support for Ukraine. His target audience, American conservatives. Dear fellow conservatives, says Ivana Stradna. So this is coming from a conservative. Orban is no conservative. He's an opportunist who is far from a model for American values. Don't fall for Orban's game. And that's a thread that I'd love to go through later because I think it'll be really interesting. Right. At the same time, the US House of Representatives has approved a ban on uranium imports from Russia. Good news. It's similar to kind of oil. We stopped buying from Russia. Obviously, they need to get it from somewhere else. Australia, for example, has huge, I think, uranium deposits. Russia will be forced. I don't know. Goodness me, would they sell uranium to dodgy places? I don't know. But it's about stopping the US having dependence on Russia for anything really, but also stopping Russia being able to make money off, in this case, the US. Ukraine really reached agreements on unblocking parts of the Ukrainian-Polish border. So this happened yesterday, and in a very short time, trucks were going in both directions. However, that then stopped. So earlier in the day, Ukraine's infrastructure minister announced that the blockade at the crossing had been lifted, and now the border crossing has been blocked again after a temporary reprieve. And that is coming from today, early this morning. That's in the middle of the night, last night. So, yeah. Good and then not good, but I think the Polish with Tusk at the helm would be onto that. I think that he's already mentioned he's going to be onto that. Now, this is not immediately connected to Ukraine, but bear with me. So Yemen's Houthis have launched a missile attack on an oil tanker that was heading to Israel. Reuters reports there were no casualties, but it looks pretty bad. It's a Norwegian flagged, I think, Israeli owned. Or the other way, Norwegian flagged Israeli ship with cruise missiles has been hit with cruise missiles after it failed to respond to a call in support of Gaza. The ship is on fire, and the company complained about the absence of US ships. Well, there are US ships in the area. There are French ships around, I think, as well, helping ships in that area. Now, why I bring this up is because I think we can learn something from the war in Ukraine here. The war in Ukraine has showed us the importance of drones, and drones are absolutely hassling many ships in the area. And, here we have these rebels having access possibly to cruise missiles as well. It's just worth noting how narrow the Red Sea access is. And so we are in a position now where you have players on the global scene that are able to disrupt international shipping with minimal risk and cost. And this is a real challenge going forward. So we had different generations of warfare. Fourth generation warfare was nation states fighting against non-nation states like ISIS that would move across borders, and it's almost like an idea that you're fighting. So it's no longer it was about defeating nations. It was about defeating non-national entities. And then we moved to fifth generation warfare, which is about information warfare as well. And now we're in a state where it's gone back to nation states fighting with Russia and Ukraine and fifth generation warfare. But also in this case, you have the ability to use high tech, so your kind of third generation warfare stuff, by non-state actors to disrupt global economic activity. And they can do that relatively easily. This is a massive challenge. So we'll be learning an awful lot from the war in Ukraine. One of the things we are learning is the prevalence and the importance of drones, but how easy they are to use and how much effect they can have on all sorts of stuff. It's going to be a huge challenge for the world going forward. How we deal with anyone that wants to disrupt anything in the world, and their ability to do that relatively easily. Anyway, I just thought I'd end with that positive note. Thanks for listening. It's been a big one again. Please take care of yourselves. Thanks for your support. Please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll speak to you later. Toodle pips.